It was the spring of 1940. Hitler launched his blitzkrieg campaign of Western Europe. It was lightning fast and devastatingly effective. By June 25th, in just a few weeks, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France all fell to the Nazi invasion. Nazi Germany stood as a nearly unstoppable force in Europe. Great Britain stood entirely alone against Hitler's war machine. Hitler's Luftwaffe, the most advanced air force in the world, stood ready to begin aerial bombardments in preparation for an invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion. During this critical time for England, Winston Churchill rose to power. On May 10, 1940, the very day Germany invaded France and the Low Countries, Churchill replaced Chamberlain as Prime Minister.
Mr. Chamberlain, and thanks for all you've tried to do. We welcome the new Prime Minister, Mr. Churchill.
Churchill had been warning about Hitler for years. He had long argued that Hitler's ambitions were far more dangerous than many realized, criticizing Chamberlain's appeasement as naive and dangerous. Although viewed by many as unpredictable and controversial, Churchill's foresight and unyielding stance against Nazi tyranny made him the right man at the right time. In his first address to Parliament as Prime Minister, he famously declared, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat."
I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat.
Churchill's leadership, resolve, and stirring oratory became a rallying cry for the nation. In 1940, as Nazi flags flew over Paris, and much of Western Europe fell to Hitler, Winston Churchill's leadership became the last major force resisting Nazi domination on the continent. Immediately after taking office, Churchill moved to form a coalition government that included members from all major parties: Conservatives, Labour, and Liberals.
We conceived on the broadest possible basis, and that it should include all parties.
This was a strategic move to unify the country politically at a time of unprecedented danger. He also assumed the role of Minister of Defense, giving him direct control over military strategy and coordination. One of his first challenges was responding to the disastrous situation unfolding in France. The British Expeditionary Force, along with French and Belgian troops, were being pushed back toward the coast by the advancing German army. Churchill ordered the commencement of Operation Dynamo, a bold and improvised evacuation from the beaches of Dunkirk. Between May 26 and June 4, 1940, over 330,000 Allied soldiers were rescued in what Churchill called a miracle of deliverance. Though Britain's military equipment loss was significant in the Dunkirk evacuation, the rescue preserved the core of Britain's army for future defense. After France surrendered to Germany, Churchill came under mounting pressure from some in his government to consider peace negotiations with Hitler, but Churchill refused. He believed Hitler could not be trusted and that any peace would amount to temporary servitude. In one of his most iconic wartime speeches, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Churchill began preparing the country for a possible German invasion. This included fortifying the coastline, arming the Home Guard, England's main civilian militia, and organizing food and fuel rationing to prepare for a long war. He made numerous visits to bombed-out neighborhoods, speaking directly to ordinary citizens and lifting public morale. Then came the Battle of Britain in the summer and fall of 1940. Churchill worked closely with military leaders to coordinate Britain's air defense. The Royal Air Force, though outnumbered, held off the Luftwaffe, preventing Germany from achieving air superiority. Churchill immortalized their heroism with the following words of indebtedness and gratitude: "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. With France occupied, Churchill launched smaller-scale raids against German positions in Europe and encouraged resistance movements through the Special Operations Executive and British commandos. In the months that followed, Churchill focused on several key priorities: preparing for future German aggression, building overseas alliances, and opening new fronts in the war. In March 1941, Churchill strongly advocated for the Lend-Lease Act, through which the United States provided Britain with military supplies, ships, and food without requiring immediate payment.
The planes, the tanks, the guns.
This act ensured that Britain could continue the war effort despite economic strain. Churchill called it the most unsordid act in the history of any nation. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, an extremely aggressive and surprise invasion of the Soviet Union. Within days, Churchill announced Britain's full backing of the Soviets, famously stating, "If Hitler invaded hell, I would at least make a favorable reference to the devil in the House of Commons." Though Churchill had long opposed communism, he recognized that any enemy of Hitler was a necessary ally. This marked the beginning of the Grand Alliance, a fragile partnership between Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Churchill moved quickly to strengthen this alliance. He coordinated with President Franklin D. Roosevelt to extend Lend-Lease aid to the Soviet Union, providing weapons, vehicles, and food to help sustain the Red Army. Churchill also sent British military missions to Moscow and began regular communication with Joseph Stalin. Though wary of Stalin's intentions, Churchill prioritized defeating Nazi Germany and believed cooperation was essential. When the United States formally entered the war after Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Grand Alliance was solidified. Churchill also focused his efforts on North Africa, where British forces engaged the Axis powers. These early campaigns, including the defense of Egypt and the Suez Canal, were vital in maintaining British influence and weakening Hitler's southern flank. After achieving victory in North Africa in 1943, Churchill advocated for a soft underbelly approach, invading Europe through Italy, which he believed would weaken the Axis powers and draw German forces away from France. He was initially reluctant to launch a cross-channel invasion into France too early, fearing high casualties and logistical failure. Instead, he supported campaigns in Sicily in July 1943 and mainland Italy in September 1943, which led to the surrender of Italy, but also a prolonged and difficult campaign against German forces. In November 1943, at the Tehran Conference, Churchill finally agreed, under pressure from both Roosevelt and Stalin, that a large-scale invasion of Western Europe, codenamed Operation Overlord, would take place in the spring of 1944. Though he had reservations, Churchill recognized the political and military necessity of this decision, particularly to meet Stalin's demand for a second front to relieve pressure on the Eastern Front. In the months leading up to D-Day, Churchill was deeply involved in the high-level planning of Operation Overlord. He emphasized deception campaigns, like Operation Bodyguard, to mislead the Germans, supported massive logistical efforts across southern England, and continued high-level diplomacy to coordinate with the US and Soviet Union. By early 1944, Churchill's leadership had helped align the Allies on a common strategy: a decisive invasion of Nazi-occupied France. During the first month of the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, beginning with D-Day on June 6, 1944, Winston Churchill played a crucial leadership role both behind the scenes and in public. He visited military headquarters and even considered landing in Normandy himself shortly after the beachheads were secured, though King George VI and his advisors talked him out of it for safety reasons. Following the liberation of Paris in August 1944, Allied forces advanced toward Germany. Churchill maintained close coordination with Roosevelt and Stalin, working to keep British interests central in Allied strategy. Churchill supported General Montgomery's efforts during Operation Market Garden in September 1944, a bold but unsuccessful attempt to secure a swift entry into northern Germany via the Netherlands. Despite the setback, Churchill backed his commanders and reinforced Britain's commitment to the Allied cause. During the Battle of the Bulge, the last major counterattack by the Nazis, from December 1944 to January 1945, Winston Churchill and Great Britain acted swiftly to support the United States, which bore the brunt of the surprise German offensive. General Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group took command of the northern sector of the front. Churchill later praised the US effort, but also emphasized that the British had played their part with honor in one of the last major battles of World War II in Europe. In 1945, as victory over Nazi Germany drew near, Winston Churchill shifted focus toward the complex task of shaping the post-war world and protecting Britain's global interests. One of Churchill's major concerns was the growing power of the Soviet Union. At the Yalta Conference in February 1945, he worked closely with Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin to negotiate post-war spheres of influence, the fate of Eastern Europe, and the formation of the United Nations. Churchill was deeply concerned about Soviet domination in Eastern Europe and sought to preserve democratic governments wherever possible. After Hitler's death was announced to the world, Germany's official surrender followed just days later in early May 1945. Winston Churchill was celebrated as a heroic wartime leader. However, his political fortunes quickly shifted. With the war in Europe over, Britain turned its attention to rebuilding and social reform. In July 1945, a general election was held, the first in 10 years. Despite Churchill's popularity, the Conservative Party suffered a landslide defeat to Clement Attlee's Labour Party, which promised bold social change. Churchill was stunned by the loss, but gracious in defeat. He stepped down as Prime Minister, but remained active in politics. Though no longer in power, Churchill continued to influence global affairs, warning of Soviet expansion in his famous 1946 Iron Curtain speech. In 1951, he returned as Prime Minister, but his role after 1945 marked the transition from wartime leader to elder statesman. Winston Churchill's leadership during World War II stands as one of the most defining and honorable chapters in British history. Churchill rallied the British people with unwavering resolve, powerful speeches, and a refusal to surrender to Nazi tyranny. His leadership guided Britain with defiance and determination. Churchill's strategic vision, diplomatic skill, and partnership with Roosevelt and Stalin ultimately defeated Hitler. Though controversial at times, Churchill's courage, eloquence, and commitment to freedom made him a symbol of resistance against oppression. His wartime leadership not only preserved Britain's sovereignty, but helped shape the post-war world. Churchill remains revered as the steadfast leader who stood firm when Britain and democracy faced its darkest hour.